All right, so everybody here, uh, we are talking about Faust Part 2 today, and I'm just going to get right into it because it is a whole lot to talk about, right? So, initial impressions with Faust Part 2, it's significantly longer than Part 1 and a lot harder to understand. Um, and my initial impressions were Part 1 is a kind of a standalone play. It kind of seems like a typical play, and you could imagine it performed. And I mean, despite the scene changes and some surrealist aspects, it could work as a play. Whereas part two certainly could not. You introduce, I mean, it felt like over 100 characters, and you have something like 30 plus scene changes. And overall, the play itself, it took me 10 hours to read, part one and part two combined, and more of that was in part two than part one. So I did a little research into Faust, and this is actually a play that was never intended to be performed, which after reading it is not that surprising. So a lot of people said that rather than comparing it to another play, or comparing it to Shakespeare or comparing it to anything else contemporary, it should be compared to Dante or Milton's Paradise Lost, right? It's more of an epic, not meant to be performed, even if it is in verse and even if it is in uh, this dramatic fashion, characters entering and exiting. It was not meant to be performed. You could think of it as more of an epic, right? An epic a la Milton or Dante. Uh, and after taking some time to think about it, I think that's a pretty accurate comparison. I mean, this is uh, representative of a world spirit in the same way that Dante was representative of that Roman Catholic spirit, and Milton was representative of this Protestant spirit. You have the Faustian spirit, as described by Faust, and we'll talk about what that means. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about the plot and what exactly happens. So, as opposed to part one, which had a pretty basic overarching narrative, you have Faust. He makes this deal with Mephistopheles, the devil, and he takes him around everywhere, falls into the temptation, falls in love with this woman, Gretchen, and then ruins her life. She goes to prison. He tries to save her, fails miserably, right? And then that's really where part one leaves off. Now we go to part two, and it's several um, years in the future. It feels uh, a lot of things have changed. You still have this Faust, but he doesn't seem at all concerned about Gretchen or love or anything. He's just this royal conjurer, right? He's a magician, alchemist, no longer grounded to the worldly pursuits. And he's working for some emperor, and they go through this whole thing. Mephistopheles convinces the emperor to start printing paper money, which I don't know, is that a comment on fiat currency or something? Possibly. And that's the other thing. Part two is extremely allegorical. Pretty much none of it is literal. So almost everything you have to look into what the deeper meaning is. Uh, but then you have this Faust who is going to work for the emperor, and his next task is he needs to summon the image of Paris and Helen. Um, and before this, he makes this homunculus, which was a whole weird thing. Uh, but there was a cool thing, a quote about the homunculus. After the homunculus kind of develops its own consciousness, there was a line that says, "The things we create hold power over us," and I really like that line because that's very much representative of modern society, right? Our this technology that we have created, now we are slaves to it, right? So just one small quote there regarding the homunculus, I thought that was pretty profound when it comes to looking at the future. But yeah, so he has this task to, re-summon Paris and Helen into the world. Um, and he succeeds, so he summons Helen, and Faust is totally smitten, fallen in love with her, which is almost comical because the people of the kingdom are kind of judging Helen, and a lot of them are not impressed. Some of the men are like, "Oh, she's the most beautiful woman in the world," and this one old guy's like, "She's used goods," which I thought was uh, pretty hilarious. But yeah, you have this Faust who immediately falls in love, which is a bit of a callback to the first book, where when Faust takes the potion, Mephistopheles says, "After you take this, you'll start seeing Helens everywhere," which is meant that he would find a lot of women beautiful, right? So now in part two, he meets the actual Helen, and she's beyond beautiful, right? He's totally smitten beyond belief. So he chases after Helen, and then she disappears. And I thought this was really cool because you kind of have this contrast between Gretchen and Helen. So Gretchen was the pure, innocent woman who actually loved him, and he abandoned her. Now you have Helen, the used goods, the nothing but her looks, um, and he's smitten with her, and she's intangible. She runs away. So you have this abandonment of love, and the uh, the chasing after of lust, right? I think Helen represents this pure lust. um, I'll pause to read a comment here. I'm still thinking about the opposition of being grounded in the world or detached from worldly concerns. Had an argument with a follower of Buddhism recently. It seems that any epic story or moving tale or meaningful experience can occur if we are grounded in the world. Uh, so you're saying we need to be grounded in order to have any kind of this uh, greater experience. Oh, he continues. So I wouldn't want to detach from the world because we wouldn't have that experience. Um, I would say in general, I agree, but also I've never been a kind of person that could be detached. I am not good at this kind of meditation, this kind of even stoicism, right? I mean, that's almost a detachment. Um, and I don't know. Some people have results with that. They say they can be totally detached, and that opens up their view. But I think for uh, the average person, that's almost impossible. I mean, and is that a goal to try to achieve? Is this asceticism a path towards enlightenment, or is it just a path towards emptiness? And I mean, you could argue all day about just that question. I don't really know which side of the argument I would lie on, but I think it is a very good point to say um, there are certain things that you can only have happen if you are grounded in the world, uh, and we see that, um, and I think that actually it's very important to this play because there is not really a point where Faust is not grounded in the world, right? All of these events are still taking place. I mean, even the surrealist aspects. Um, he's a member of the world. He has not gone beyond it. He might have gone beyond the powers of a normal human, but he's still grounded in human reality. So Siddhartha says, do you think the symbol of Helen as some kind of ideal feminine has any broader significance to the Faustian conquest of space Spengler talks about? Okay, so now we're talking about Spengler and the Faustian spirit. The Faustian spirit is defined by conquest of space, in Spengler's words. So we see Helen as an ideal feminine. Uh, I mean, I'm sure I think it all depends on how you look at it, right? Of course, you say that Faust has the dream of conquering the ideal feminine, right? The most beautiful woman in the world. To finally have her is the full manifestation of masculine conquest, right? And then Sid says, if feminine equals space and masculine time, which some thinkers make that comparison. Um, okay, so the ultimate feminine would be the ultimate conquest of space. Well, yeah, I mean, in any kind of allegorical view, I mean, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Um, so the conquest of Helen is the ultimate conquest of space. I think that's definitely a lens through which this could be viewed. Um, and so, well, talking about Helen, so he ends up not being able to achieve her immediately, right? She runs off. So then what happens next is this classical Walpurgis Night, which echoes the first Walpurgis Night of part one. Um, and both of these are occurring after the loss of the woman, right? So uh, after Gretchen is imprisoned, that's when Faust reaches his absolute moral decline with Walpurgis Night and this satanic Dionysian orgy, right? Now, after he loses Helen, he goes to this classical Walpurgis Night, which is much, much different and highly allegorical. And I mean, you probably need a bit more classical analysis to kind of see all the different references in here. But he talks to sphinxes and griffins and all of this. And I don't feel like I would do justice, trying to really dive into, the meaning behind all that. But essentially, uh, he finds this, well, Mephistopheles hints him to go to the mothers, right? Uh, and they are this underworld force, which we never actually see. There is no scene of him going. We just see him vanishing underground and then coming back. But he gives him the idea to go to the mothers, and they give him the uh, way to reclaim Helen, right? So he's going to basically start this kingdom and uh, take Helen prisoner in this odd way of making it look like he's actually saving her from a life of imprisonment, right? He lies and says that uh, Menelaus is planning on killing her, uh, so she is going to stay with him for protection. So it's this whole scam to try and get her to come be with him. And there's a whole lot of deep analysis here between the classical and the, uh, well, modern when it was written, but I guess we would say the Faustian, right? The classical versus the Faustian style. So a lot of these chapters with Helen are actually written in the form of like a Greek tragedy, right? The entire verse changes, the style changes, and now you have this much more classical scene, right? So you have this merging of classical and Faustian elements, which ultimately uh, ends with Helen and Faust conceiving a child, right? Your I've already forgotten the name. It was like Euryphion, right? Something like that. Euphorion, that's it. Uh, so they conceive this child, Euphorion, and it's all awesome. They have this moment of bliss where Faust actually achieves this woman, you know, the ideal feminine, which, could be his final conquest of space. Uh, and then Euphorion dies. It was kind of like an Icarus thing, right? He attempted to scale a mountain and then fell off a cliff. Uh, and so Euphorion dies. So now uh, Euphorion, obviously that's a reference to euphoria. The child brought this intense happiness, and perhaps Faust finally had found what he was looking for, right? Found fulfillment, found happiness, and now it was stripped away from him. And what that means, I mean, perhaps that's saying, the merging of classical and Helen and Faustian and Faust can never occur. That's just a cursed relationship, or maybe the entire relationship at the surface level was cursed in the sense that it was entirely based off of this quest for lust and not actually based on love like his relationship with Gretchen was. So this is the second one of Faust's children that was conceived in the play and dies. So yeah, things are really looking great for Faust. Um, and then so from here you have another fast forward. Essentially, uh, Faust is working for the emperor again, and he's going to help win a battle against a rival emperor by summoning three biblical heroes uh, who fought with David against Goliath. Um, and he's going to win this battle and get this seaside kingdom all to his own. And his idea is he's going to reclaim the land from the sea, which I, in my interpretation, is an example of an impossible task. Right, his final task that he set himself to is literally impossible. Right, the forces of nature are going to be greater than any of the forces of man. He's never going to actually be able to create this seaside kingdom that he wants, even though he aspires to it, right? And then so you have uh, the ultimate end of Faust, um, where uh, he almost has this land totally secure. He's united all of the lands except for one little cottage, and he tries to evict this couple from their cottage and ends up having his warriors slay them. And he kind of realizes the extent of the evil of his conquests. Right? He says, "I extended too far, and people have gotten hurt." So this shows that Faust still has this moral compass, right? And he's gone in and out of, you know, being a moral man. I mean, he got extremely immoral towards the end of part one, but now you see, as an old man, I said he was over 100 years old. He still has this moral compass, and he knows that he's done wrong. And then he has this spirit come to him in the form of care that is going to blind him and then finally make him, realize the error of his ways. So I think that the final admittance here from Faust was that man should not go beyond what is possible of man. Right? Man is confined to this worldly power, and to attempt to go past it is wrong and is not going to lead to fulfillment. It is going to lead to this endless struggle for something that will never be achieved. And then you're going to hurt people in the process, right? So he killed the couple in his attempt to evict them to unify his kingdom. And then finally, Faust dies, uh, and he utters, right before he dies, he utters the phrase, I believe the phrase is, "Thou art so fair," and that was in part one. Mephistopheles originally made this pact that if he ever said that about any era in his life that Mephistopheles would take him to see, then he would owe him his soul. Um, and so Mephistopheles thinks that he's won because he heard Faust finally utter the magic words. Um, but the thing is, he was not saying about any corporeal time or place. He was blinded in his blind, so the only thing he was thinking about was this non-existent future kingdom in his mind's eye, and that is what he said was so fair, and that is where he said he wanted to remain to be, right? And so in that final act, his soul was actually saved, um, because he had never, succumbed to Mephistopheles' temptation, and uh, his final wish, his final joy, was this future kingdom that never actually existed, that only existed in his mind, which is quite profound, I have to say. Um, and I think some of the overarching analysis on uh, this final moment is pretty incredible. Um, so one thing that some critics were saying, they said this Faust, Siddhartha says the kingdom of God. That is one possible. I don't know how I feel about that, because Faust was never this religious man, right? And then he's ascended into heaven, um, which I mean is obviously kind of divine reference, right? Nobody ascends into heaven besides Jesus. But Faust was ascended, shepherded there by angels, um, into the actual kingdom of God. So maybe there's a comparison between this future he had in his mind and the real kingdom of God. But the thing is that Faust was never a really moral or religious person throughout his life. I mean, he still maintained this moral character, but he was not a purely virtuous man throughout the whole story. Uh, so even though Faust was saved, this is not uh, a condonement. This is not Goethe condoning Faust's actions and his worldview, right? So he managed to save himself at the end uh, by this final acceptance that he was doing the wrong thing. So this final acceptance that he was going beyond the means of man and searching for something that he could never have, right? So the whole point of the play is that man should not go beyond his means. Man should not seek what is not made for man. And that's what Faust did. And, he lived to be 100, being totally unfulfilled. And the only thing that was ever, his true sense of joy was this idea that he created in his head that was totally unattainable. Which, if you, start to think about that, I mean, that's some incredibly profound philosophy on the Faustian spirit and modern man, um, and what modern man as a collective, modern society has really attempted to do. Uh, so you have this thing that Spengler talks about the Faustian spirit as this endless drive to conquer the expansion of space and constantly pushing further and further, which is what Faust did, and it's also what modern man does, right? We keep pushing and pushing, um, but uh, now we have to ask ourselves, is this the right thing to do? Or were we meant to keep searching for all of this? Were we meant to keep conquering space? Were we meant to keep inventing things? Right? And remember that one line that I brought up that I'll go back to is that when he talks about the homunculus, the things we create hold power over us, right? We're now a slave to the things that we've created. Um, and that is the perfect characterization of modern man. He's endlessly seeking more, but he's a slave to that which he has created. And so the ultimate, like I said, the ultimate moral of the story, right? If we're going to summarize one moral out of the story, um, it's that Faust he went too far, right? He was searching for fulfillment in the wrong places. He was trying to find fulfillment through this constant pushing of the human potential, and in it he had to succumb to power of the devil. When the one thing he was always rejecting, right, and this is a constant theme throughout the both parts, is his constant rejection of anything spiritual, right? He has no spiritualism. He has a very loose concept of belief in God, and he sees much more. He sees much more in his own merits, right? His own power, his own drive, than he does in any of the any powers of God, right? Anything divine. He sees human as above the divine. And that's a fault of his, right? And because of that, he's never going to achieve, actualization, satisfaction, contentment. Instead, he's going to be constantly driving, constantly pushing, and constantly stumbling along that path. Um, which ultimately, I want to tie that back to our first discussion that wasn't necessarily about Faust, but the Faustian spirit, right? I postulated that the Faustian spirit is dead or dying, right? And I'd like to see your opinions on the Faustian spirit. But my opinion after reading this is, we see this man, Faust, who had this glorification of the constant pursuit of more. And if we look at modern man, we had this pursuit. We constantly pursued more. We conquered more. We conquered more space. We invented more things. We made life uh, easier, ostensibly. Um, but now we're at the point where what more is there to conquer? What more is there to create if the things that we have created are just benefiting our own slavery? Um, and I think you have so much of this corruption of the Faustian will today, right? Some people talk about space. They talk about space as a corruption of the Faustian will. We have this desire to go beyond where man was ever meant to go, right? And because we still have this will inside of us, we see it as a good thing. We say we need to colonize the moon, we need to colonize Mars, we need to go mine asteroids. Is this really the best way to spend our time? Is this going to lead us to more prosperity, more actualization, more fulfillment? Um, and the more I think about it, the more I think no. I mean, what's going to happen? We start mining asteroids, so we'll have more precious metals because precious metals are bringing us actualization and material happiness. I mean, not really. I don't think if we just distributed an ounce of gold to every person in the world, would they be happier? Would they be a step closer to self-actualization? It doesn't work like that. If we, you know, take a person who has this drive to explore and we shoot them on a space shuttle and send them to a moon base, and they get to sit in total darkness on the moon collecting rocks for a year, is that benefiting society? Um, are they self-actualizing in this will to conquer and expand, or are you just taking advantage of that will in order to get them to do something stupid and pointless that is really not doing that much for us in the in the grander sense of trying to self-actualize as human beings? So Siddhartha says, one thing on the modern spirit, there's a fascination with speed of light travel that represents the ultimate conquest of space that I think ties into the Faustian ideal in a real way. In a real way, that is very, very. That's a very great point. I love that point. Yeah, we have this literal, physical boundary. This absolute boundary decided by, uh, you know, contemporary physics that says you cannot go beyond the speed of light, and because of that, our uh, our will to conquest is hampered. Right? We cannot conquest everything that we want to because we are limited by the speed at which we can travel. So the ultimate thing that we are seeking as a people, and you see this in sci-fi, you see this in just the average person. They say, "Wow, how cool would it be if we had FTL that's faster than light travel?" Right? If we had FTL, just imagine what we could do as a human race. Imagine the way places that we could go. Um, and it's this quite. I mean, in my opinion, and this is purely an opinion, which I guess, well, maybe it's not an opinion. Maybe this is rooted in fact. This is a wall, right? This is not something that we can overcome. This is uh, a hard line in reality that will never be passed. We will never achieve faster than light travel, and this is a way of God, or whatever your conception of God is, this natural universe, to tell us that you cannot do this. This is your boundary. Do not go past it. So to even attempt to, seek that out is so ultimately Faustian, right? To overextend our means into something that should never be achieved. And we're going to pour tons of resources and time into this task that is ultimately a wild goose chase, right? We will never get to this point, and it will just be a corruption of that will, this endless thing that we will never achieve. And maybe on our deathbed we'll close our eyes and we'll imagine this non-existent civilization, this non-existent uh, galactic empire, and maybe that will bring us some kind of satisfaction, but it will never actually exist in the real world, right? It will always be fiction. Um, and so that is a total corruption of this Faustian will, right? This Faustian spirit. Um, And then, in my opinion, the exact same thing is true of technology, right? The things that we create hold power over us. So now, if we can no longer conquest space, right? We can no longer conquer space. We are going to attempt to conquer science and logic and reason, and we are going to push the boundaries of mechanics, push the boundaries of technology, push the boundaries of artificial intelligence, push the boundaries of genetics, right? We are going to extend in this way into this realm of, supposedly pure logic, right? And we're going to extend farther than man should go. Man should not be playing God. Man should not be um, creating genetically modified babies. Man should not be um, trying to create artificial intelligence, robots that have a spirit and emotions and a soul. Um, because in my opinion, this is another thing that will be, an ultimate. It will never happen, right? I don't think we will ever achieve, any robot with a level of consciousness that a human has, right? And we'll be constantly be pushing for this and pushing for this, and people are talking. They're like, oh, we'll have what they're calling the fourth industrial revolution, right? When we finally have this sophisticated artificial intelligence. It's not going to happen, right? It's this corruption of the Faustian will. We're going to keep pushing for this, and we're never going to achieve it, and we're going to fall flat on our face. All the while, the things that we do create are only going to be aiding and abetting our own destruction. Everything, every step along this path of AI is just going to, displace more people, destroy the capacity for human actualization, destroy our capacity for finding meaningful work, destroy our capacity for creating meaningful relationships. You see this in things like artificial chatbots. I mean, people are falling in love with robots. It's kind of ridiculous. So the things that we create hold power over us. Um, and it's just a corruption of the Faustian will. And conquest of space, corruption of the Faustian will. So what is the solution? Is there ever going to be more space for us to conquer? Are we going to find new islands in the Pacific Ocean? Are we going to find underground caverns that haven't been explored? I don't think so. I don't think there will ever be, a realm of conquest the way that there was at the peak of the Faustian man. So all we're doing is trying to artificially prolong the death of the Faustian spirit. Um, and this ties back to Spengler. He talks about the decline of the West. That means the decline of the Faustian spirit. Eventually, um, humanity is going to have to recognize that what we are pursuing is totally false. It is totally unattainable, and we are going to have to find different ways of self-actualizing. And we might have to return to some classical conception of the world. Some small, localized way of living. Um, I mean, and I like the idea of that. I think that's a much more healthy way than we have been living. Or maybe it'll be a totally new sense of world spirit. Maybe it'll be something, some new kind of spirit we could awaken. And I don't even know how that would look, how it would manifest. But it could be any number of things. So now Siv says, so this corruption of the Faustian will is us losing touch with the spiritual realm. Well, I very much agree with that too. Uh, I mean, it's not purely just losing touch with the spiritual realm, but that's a huge part of it, right? Faust was not a spiritual man. He pursued pure material logic and reason in the same way that modern man has, right? We have gone completely secular. We have an outright worship of science, right? Science is no longer what it used to be. It's not the scientific method. Science is a dogma. Um, it's this placing of human reason beyond anything else intangible, beyond anything else uh, that might have its own mode of working, right? If it's not logical, it can't exist. There's no such thing as, collective unconscious. There's no such thing as divine will. These are totally inferior ideas in the face of human logic and reason. So, uh, yeah, that is a huge component of why the Faustian will is corruption. But I don't think that's just a component of the Faustian will, right? I mean, it was kind of in that sense it was corrupt from the start, right? The Faustian man is uh, abandoning spirituality um, to prefer reason, right? Whereas the corruption of the Faustian will is the final extent of this, where this will is no longer even being used towards an end that you could even justify as being good, right? And I kind of talked about this the first time we talked about the Faustian will. When I say corruption, when I say like something like space travel is a corruption of the Faustian will, because at least, when you think of the height of Europe colonization and things, there was some tangible benefit and some um, obvious goal that was reaching for, right? We want more land, we want more material wealth, we want uh, more prosperity for our people. How exactly are we gaining any of that by mining asteroids and creating a moon base, right? It's not really, I don't see an immediate way how this is going to create a tangible benefit for us. So that's why I see it as a corruption, because at least, despite its lack of spiritual nature, the height of Faustian will made sense. It was, we are conquering, we are expanding, and it is good for us. It is good for our people. We are benefiting from this. Now, the listener says, true, but is not exploration a good purpose? It could have a truer basis. Well, I say yes if there is something to explore, right? Exploration for the sake of exploration when there's not really anything out there is, I mean, I don't really see the point, right? I just imagine us, creating, bases on other planets that are really just rocks. We're not going to find life on Mars. We're not going to find, you know, we're not going to be able to go to hidden oceans underneath the crust of Neptune, right? Um, and even if we did, uh, is this the final stage of human actualization, to see a cold, dead, empty world, and not to um, find a better way to exist in our nice, green, lively world full of other people like us who we can connect with, socialize with, form bonds with, and actually experience things like love and compassion. Those are things that are not as tangible, right? But ultimately tend to lead more towards self-actualization, right? I mean, um, uh, the idea of exploration is an age-old idea, but it's still not as old as self-fulfillment through having a family, right? I mean, that's the most timeless mode of self-actualization that has never gone away. From the dawn of society, that has always been a mode of actualization, whereas exploration had its height, and now it's obviously in decline. And at this point, I think we're just keeping it on life support, right? We're just trying to direct that will into things that are ultimately pointless. But I do see what you're saying. I mean, there's plenty of good that could come from exploration at a basic level, um, and there is objective truth. There's tangibility in exploration. I just don't think something like space exploration is that. I don't think um, it will ever lead to a greater understanding, joy, or knowledge of the human condition. And I guess I keep being hung up on space, but space is not the only corruption of the Faustian will, but I mean, it is the main one that you can think of right now. Um, all right, well, I've been talking a lot. Oh, okay. So the listener says, I totally get you. Wife and children come out on top by far. I may have missed a point or two since I'm getting some piano practice in. Hey, that's all good. We'll have this uploaded later on YouTube if you want to try again. I also have the first episode where I really went into this, you know, my description of the Faustian spirit and why it is dead or dying. And I am really just, revisiting that in light of having just read Faust, which I think is, the most important thing to get out of this. Faust is the description of Faustian spirit. Faust is the long allegory for modern man, and that's what he was intended to be. And Faust is not a strong, upright, moral character. He is an incredibly intelligent, ambitious character. And all that intelligence and ambition never got him uh, self actualization or satisfaction throughout his life. And that is what Goethe is trying to tell us. We need more. We need something spiritual. We need to understand our limits as humans, and we need to not go where man was never meant to go. And I think, and 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 the things, the more I say this, the more I describe the situation, the more it sounds like space is actually the ultimate corruption of Faustian will, right? Go where man was never meant to go. It's quite literally a cold, dead wasteland. There is no heat. There is no air. It if we need, a giant suit just to survive, obviously we don't belong in space. Obviously we belong on Earth. And yet we're going to go so far beyond our means into this place where we are never meant to go and expect that to be where we find actualization, contentment, and happiness. It's not going to happen. And that's why the Faustian will has been corrupted. Um, but yeah, that's Faust, and that's the Faustian will. And yeah, I mean, this is a real classic. I mean, this is, you probably have to read this 4 or 5 more times before, you really got all of the different bits of it. Oh, actually, that's a lie. You probably have to read this 100 times to get every single allegorical, classical reference that is inside of this. Every reference to a contemporary uh, poet. Um, but at the very least, to get all of the elements of the Faustian spirit and what exactly Goethe's point was, that's going to take several more readings. But I definitely would say this is a classic, um, and it's not an easy read. But after reading some analysis, I think that this really does hold up. With something like Divine Comedy, it holds up with. I mean, this is probably more. This is probably better than anything Shakespeare has written. Not to say Shakespeare is bad, but Shakespeare never had something so ambitious, something so truly philosophical. Um, so yeah, I recommend Faust for pretty much anybody. And then a few final comments. We have Casey is saying space is hell. Yes, quite literally. The lowest circle of hell was actually frozen over, right? According to Dante, sounds a lot like Pluto to me. Oh, fun fact: Pluto is the Roman name for Hades. The god of the underworld. So think about that. There's 9 planets, 9 circles of hell. I don't know. There's a lot of some esoteric stuff going on with this. Then we just have exploration of space is just an infinite cycle from one solar system to another ad infinitum. Fun fact: some people estimated the IQ of old philosophers, and Goethe was the highest at 220. Yeah, I really think that Goethe's IQ had to have been 220. Uh, I'm gonna call BS on that, but um, I mean that is really impressive. I understand what they're implying though. They're implying that he has such a. This is a very deep story, right? I mean, each scene is littered with classical references and contemporary references and uh, philosophical depth. Um, so yeah, I mean, you obviously have to be a very intelligent guy to construct something like this. um, all right, well, if there's no more chats, I will give the option if anybody wants to come talk in a voice chat. Just pop in. Um, Otherwise, I think I've said everything that was on my mind. And so, yeah, I'll leave the phone lines open. Otherwise, we'll end the recording. Oh, but I do want to say for our next book, we're going to be talking about Man and Technics by Oswald Spengler. So I think this is the perfect tie-in. Reading Decline of the West is a massive undertaking. It obviously talks about the Faustian spirit, but I think reading some other Spengler is a great thing to do. He obviously has his opinions on Faust and his opinions on modern man and the path that we're taking. So I think this is a great thing to read for the next 2 weeks. So 2 weeks from today, we're going to um, talk about Man and Technics. But next week, I think we're actually going to have a guest lecture on. So we'll have some kind of co-stream with me and Siddhartha. Very intelligent guy. I know IRL, so I know I can trust him to do a good job. So yeah, I hope you guys are looking forward to that. So yeah, so should be some really good discussions the next 2 weeks. Um, and so it seems like nobody entered the VC. So I guess I'll just end this stream here. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you learned something. I hope we had a good discussion. Cheers.